Hi, this is John Allen, the editor of Crux. Welcome to another video exclusive on the Crux YouTube page. In these video exclusives, we try to bring you a cross-section of movers and shakers in the Catholic world, interesting voices and perspectives out there. And today we are delighted to be joined by someone from the Columbans Center for Advocacy and Outreach. It's a project of the Missionary Society of St. Columban. We have with us the advocacy coordinator at the center, Rebecca Eastwood. Becca, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you for having us. So let's start with this. I know the whole Columban thing is intimately familiar to you, and I know a little bit about it. But for people who don't know what the Missionary Society of St. Columban is, what it means to be an activity that's in the Columban tradition or of the Columban spirit, can you just explain a little bit what it means to be a Columban and how this is part of that spirit?
Sure. So, the official charism of the Columbans is cross cultural mission. So, for the past 100 years that the society has been operating, Columban fathers and lay missionaries have traveled all over the world to contexts and cultures outside of their own to serve and be missioners to vulnerable and marginalized communities across the globe. And so, what it means to be a Columban in that context is to really step outside of what you know to be in service to others. And so, the other part of that is throughout that process, people, part of the society and part of that mission, are also transformed themselves. And by stepping out of your own context, learning more about yourself as a person and your faith and how to live the gospel in the world.
Now, I notice, Becca, you've got a map of the world behind you. Or are you tracking Columban missions? I mean, or like, do you have like a GPS that tells you where these people are at all times? Or it sounds like this is a very far-flung enterprise. How do you keep track of it?
That's a great question. We're not necessarily tracking by GPS, but we are in 15 countries around the world at the moment. And it was actually started, the society was started by a group of Irish priests. And so they started in Ireland and then went around the world, starting in a smaller number of countries, but then expanding from there to the 15 that we have today. And so we've been in and out of some countries and have been in some countries since the beginning. But that the through line through all of that is they're always going to communities and populations that are marginalized and underserved and in places that people oftentimes couldn't or wouldn't go.
So, you run or help run a center that is described as being for advocacy and outreach. And of course, by advocacy, you're talking about advocacy on behalf of those marginalized and forgotten peoples, but that advocacy often has a sort of political edge. Now, I mean, for a lot of people, like the idea of faith communities, people of faith, engaging in charity, direct charity, makes all the sense in the world. Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, teaching the ignorant, caring for the sick. All of that. That's right in the wheelhouse of traditional things Christians have always done. Advocacy, on the other hand, particularly when it involves being in DC and engaging in policy debates, that can sometimes strike people as a little too political and kind of unsuited for faith-based or religious organizations. So, why, in your view, is advocacy a natural extension of the Columban spirit as you've just described?
Mm. So this distinction actually became quite clear for me when I began working for the Columbans. Working in that context has really made it apparent why those two things have to go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And so, in the Columban context, for decades, and like I said, the past 100 years, Columbans have been in those communities that are underserved and that are marginalized and oftentimes oppressed. And they minister to their daily needs, they all those examples that you just provided. And by doing that, they see that it can't only be responding to those daily needs, but it has to be addressing the root of the problem. Because if you don't address the root of the problem, then it will continue happening. And if the gospel is really about the fullness of life, then we have to be attentive to what is not allowing the fullness of life to happen. And so, if that's what we're really being true to, then we have to get to the root of what is causing the suffering of these populations. And so, advocacy in that context is getting at that root of the problem. And so, for example, the Columbans have been in Taiwan for decades. And in their work beginning in Taiwan, they worked with migrant workers who came from all over the world to Taiwan to be able to provide for their families. And these workers were often in very vulnerable situations, which then was often taken advantage of. And so, through that daily ministering to the migrant workers, the Columbans began to see this pattern of abuse and oppression. And they knew that in order to really minister to these migrant workers, they had to address why that was happening. And so they set up shelters and they organized these migrant workers to bring their stories to the Taiwanese government so that they understood the impact of the policy that they had. And really bridging that gap helped, and they did win some better protections for these migrant workers by being able to go to the root of that policy.
Now, Becca, I can't let you go without asking you this. You're talking about how the spirit of the Columbans is about serving the marginalized, the underserved, those who have been forgotten. We have a pope at the moment. You may have noticed, Pope Francis, who very much breathes that air. He always talks about reaching out to the peripheries of the world, and he's talking precisely about people who typically are ignored, pushed to the margins, forgotten, and sometimes oppressed. This is also a pope who has been known to engage in a little bit of advocacy himself. And so it seems like that this is a moment in which what you were trying to do through the Columban network and at the Columban Center aligns fairly well with the kind of leadership that we're seeing from the pontiff. Is that how you see it?
We do. We get a lot of our inspiration from Pope Francis. I remember when he came to DC and addressed Congress. And this is one of, he's made a lot of impactful statements and formed a lot of people's faiths and really energized this part of the Catholic faith. But that was one particularly that impacted me because he said that politics at its root is in service of the common good. And that's what we really have to hold on to. And so our advocacy work is in service of the common good. And that really stuck with me and has provided me personally with a lot of inspiration for this work.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you wouldn't always know the politics is in service to the common good from watching the way DC works sometimes, perhaps now more than ever. But thank God you're still there plugging away and trying to make that stick. So, Becca, if people want to know more about the Columban Center, about the advocacy work you do, about the broader Columban network, where can they go? Where is that information available?
Great question. You can go to www.columbancenter.org to learn more about the issues that we work on and that we are responsive to. And to be involved with our advocacy work, you can sign up for our emails and you will get a weekly reflection on spirituality and advocacy and justice work, and also opportunities to take action and be responsive to the issues that are happening now and that need your voice. So we encourage you to sign up for those emails and also check out our website to see other ways to be involved.
You can give us a little taste. What's something you're working on right now?
Great question. So one of our top issues at the moment is working in support of the DREAM Act, which is for to institutionalized protections for DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA recipients. And so part of our work as Columbans is working on the issue of migration. Because being all over the world, Columbans have seen populations on the move. And so this is really at the heart of what we're doing at the moment to make sure that we are living out that call to welcome the stranger and to protect family unity.
And of course, migrants and refugees and the whole immigration debate is another vintage Pope Francis issue. I mean, he has in some ways become, well, he's the Pope of many things, but among those many things, the Pope of people on the move. So, once again, it would seem that what you're doing is kind of neatly aligned with where the Pope is trying to steer the church. Okay, www.columbancenter.org. You can find everything you need to know about what the center is up to and also about the justice issues of the day and how you can engage them. It is a terrific resource for Catholics everywhere. Becca, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, John.
So this has been a video feature on the Crux YouTube page. Keep checking the YouTube page. We will have more of these video features all the time. Until we see one another again, I'm John Allen, the editor of Crux, and you have a fantastic day.